When God closes every door. Have you ever tried so hard for something and still lost it? Have you ever prayed with everything inside you, believing with your whole heart, and still watched the door close right in your face? Have you ever sat alone in a quiet room, wondering if God even remembers your name? Have you ever felt like everyone around you was moving forward while you were standing completely still, left behind, forgotten, invisible? Have you ever reached the end of your strength and whispered, "Lord, I don't understand, I just don't understand"? If any of those questions touched something deep inside you, then this story is for you, not for someone else. For you, right now, in the middle of whatever you're carrying. Because here is something most people never tell you. Sometimes the doors that refuse to open are not punishments. Sometimes they are protection. Sometimes God is not ignoring your prayers. He is answering them in a way you cannot yet see. Sometimes the closed door is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is God quietly, carefully, lovingly rerouting your steps towards something your heart doesn't even have words for yet. Sometimes the rejection is the redirection. And sometimes the silence you are hearing from heaven is not absence. It is preparation. This is the story of a man named Daniel. Not a famous Daniel. Not a Daniel from history books or church stages. Just a quiet, ordinary man from a small town who spent years watching every door he knocked on stay firmly closed. A man who prayed faithfully, worked honestly, loved genuinely, and still walked through one of the longest and most painful seasons of his life, wondering what he had done wrong. This is his story, and if you listen carefully, you will find that it might also be yours. Daniel grew up in a modest home in a small town where everyone knew each other's name and most people never left. His father worked at a factory for 32 years. His mother cleaned houses and cooked meals that could fill a whole neighborhood with warmth. They were not wealthy people, but they were rich in something harder to measure. They were rich in faith. Every Sunday morning, without exception, the family sat together in the third pew from the front at their small church. Daniel knew the hymns by heart before he was 10 years old. He had heard the stories of Abraham and Joseph and Ruth so many times that they felt like stories about people he personally knew. But as a boy, Daniel had a dream. A real dream. Not the sleeping kind, the waking kind. The kind that burns inside your chest when you are young and everything still feels possible. He wanted to become a doctor, not because it sounded impressive, not because of the money, but because when he was 7 years old, his baby sister had been very sick. The kind of sick that makes parents stop sleeping, the kind that makes the whole house go quiet and heavy. And he remembered sitting in the hospital waiting room, watching a doctor walk out to his parents with a calm face and steady hands, and hearing the words, "She's going to be fine." He remembered the way his mother's whole body changed in that moment, the way her shoulders dropped, the way his father exhaled like he had been holding his breath for days. He remembered thinking that the doctor had somehow carried that moment for their entire family, had taken something unbearable and made it survivable. And something in Daniel's young heart decided, quietly and firmly, that he wanted to do that for other people someday. He wanted to be the person in the room who brought good news, who steadied the shaking hands, who gave families back their hope. He carried that dream all through school. He studied harder than anyone in his class. While other kids played after school, Daniel sat at the kitchen table doing extra reading, memorizing terms, practicing problems. His teachers loved him. Not because he was the loudest or the most confident, but because he was the most sincere. He meant everything he did. He gave everything he had. When it came time to apply to university for pre-medicine, Daniel had excellent grades. He applied to 4 schools. Good schools. Schools where the path to medical school was clear and well established. He prayed over every application. He wrote his personal statements with honesty and heart. He told the story of his sister. He told the story of that doctor in the waiting room. He told the truth about who he was and where he came from and what he wanted his life to mean. He was rejected by all 4. He sat at the kitchen table holding the last letter, and he didn't cry at first. He just sat very still. His mother came and stood behind him and put her hands on his shoulders and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "God's timing is not our timing, baby." And he nodded. But something inside him felt like a small crack had appeared in something that had always been whole. He applied again the following year. He worked even harder. He took extra courses. He volunteered at the local clinic on weekends. He saved money from a part-time job to pay for preparation classes. He prayed every night. Not dramatic, performed prayers, just honest ones, quiet ones. The kind where you sit in the dark and say, "Lord, you know my heart. You know this dream. Please, please open this door." He was rejected again. Not by all 4 schools this time. By 5. He had applied to 5, hoping to improve his chances, and every single one said no. The second wave of rejection was different from the first. The first one had cracked something. The second one broke something open. He didn't tell many people. He smiled at church on Sundays. He helped his father with repairs around the house. He continued volunteering at the clinic. But inside, he began to carry a heaviness that he didn't know how to put down. He started asking God questions he had never asked before. Not angry questions. Daniel was never an angry person. But desperate questions. The kind that only come out when you are truly exhausted. Why would you put this in my heart if it wasn't meant to be? Why would you let me want this so badly and then close every door? What am I missing? What am I doing wrong? Is there something in me that isn't right? Am I not good enough? Am I not worthy of this? And the silence that came back was not comfortable silence. It was heavy silence. The kind that feels less like peace and more like waiting in an empty room for someone who may not be coming. He took a job as an administrative assistant at a small medical office in his town. It wasn't what he had planned. It wasn't where he thought he would be at 23. But it paid the bills and kept him close to the world of medicine that he still loved. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he was just resting, waiting, regrouping. He still believed, somewhere underneath all the heaviness, that God had a plan. He just couldn't see the shape of it anymore. The office where Daniel worked served a working-class community. Most of the patients were people who didn't have much. Elderly people on fixed incomes, families without good insurance, people who sometimes had to choose between their medication and their groceries. Daniel noticed things about the patients that the doctors didn't always have time to notice. He noticed when someone came in looking frightened and alone. He noticed when an elderly woman was confused about her prescription and too embarrassed to ask questions. He noticed when a young mother was trying to manage 3 children in the waiting room while also filling out forms she clearly didn't fully understand. He started helping in small ways, sitting with the confused patients and gently explaining their paperwork, helping the young mothers keep their children calm, learning the names of the regulars and greeting them warmly so that coming to the doctor felt less intimidating. He didn't think of any of it as anything special. He was just doing what felt natural, what felt kind. But the patients noticed, and they started asking for him by name. "Is Daniel working today?" they would ask at the front desk. "I want to wait for Daniel." There was one patient in particular who came in every 2 weeks. Her name was Mrs. Avery. She was 71 years old, small and thin with silver hair and eyes that were still very sharp and alive, even though her body was tired. She had a heart condition that required regular monitoring. She had no family nearby. She lived alone in a small apartment and took the bus to the clinic by herself every 2 weeks, rain or shine, summer or winter. Daniel always made sure to walk her to her seat personally, always brought her a cup of water without being asked, always made sure she understood everything that had happened in her appointment before she left. He learned that she had been a school teacher for 40 years, that she had taught 3rd grade, that she had a daughter who had moved far away and called on birthdays and holidays but not much in between, that her husband had died 7 years ago, and that the grief still sat inside her like weather that never fully cleared. One afternoon, after her appointment, Daniel noticed that she seemed more tired than usual, more quiet. He sat down beside her in the waiting room, which was temporarily empty, and just asked, "Are you okay, Mrs. Avery?" She looked at him for a moment, like she was deciding something. Then she said, "Do you know what I miss most about getting old? It's not my health. It's not even my husband, though I miss him every day. What I miss most is feeling like I matter to somebody. My presence in the world makes a difference to someone." Daniel didn't have a grand response. He didn't quote scripture or offer a long speech. He just said, "You matter to me, Mrs. Avery. Every time you come in here, this place is better for it." She looked at him, The way people look at you when you have said exactly the right thing. And then she did something unexpected. She reached over and patted his hand and said, "You are going to do something very important with your life, young man. I don't know what it is yet, but I've taught enough children to recognize someone who was made for something, and you were made for something." He thanked her and smiled and walked her to the bus stop. And on the way back inside, he stopped for a moment on the sidewalk and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He couldn't name it exactly. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace. It was something quieter than both. Something like a small, steady light in a dark room. A warmth that didn't ask anything of him, just existed for a moment. And then he went back inside and answered the phones and processed the files and helped the next patient fill out their forms. The months passed. Daniel kept living his small, faithful, quiet life. He went to church. He helped at the clinic. He visited his parents on Sundays. He prayed at night in the dark, sometimes with words and sometimes without. He still carried the dream, but it had changed shape. It was less urgent now, less sharp, like something he held more gently because gripping it too tight had only made him hurt. He applied to medical school one more time. His third attempt. He applied to 3 schools with honesty and with hope, but without the desperate, white-knuckled need of before. He prayed about it differently this time. Not "please open this door," but "Lord, if this is where you want me, open it. And if it isn't, help me trust you enough to be okay." He was accepted by one school, a smaller school, a less prestigious one than he had originally dreamed of. Not the kind of name that impressed people at dinner parties, but a real school, a good school, one that specifically focused on training doctors for underserved communities. He stood in his kitchen, holding the acceptance letter, and he cried. Not the desperate crying of grief, the kind of crying that comes when something inside you finally releases. When a weight you have been carrying so long you forgot it was there suddenly lifts. He started school that September, and almost immediately something became clear. The years he had spent working at that small medical office had given him something that most of his classmates didn't have. He understood patients, not just their symptoms. He understood their fear, their confusion, their shame around not being able to afford things, their loneliness, their need to feel like a person and not just a case number. He had spent years sitting beside people like Mrs. Avery, learning what it felt like to be on the other side of the clinical desk. And that knowledge was worth more than any textbook. His professors noticed it early. One of them, a quiet woman named Dr. Reyes, who had spent 20 years working in rural clinics before teaching, pulled him aside after class one day. "Where did you develop your patient communication skills?" she asked. He explained his background, the years of administrative work, the small clinic, the patients he had learned by name. She listened carefully. Then she said, "Most students spend their entire medical education trying to learn what you already know. Don't lose it. Protect it. It is more rare than you think." He didn't lose it. If anything, medical school deepened it. He became known in his cohort as the student who always sat with the nervous patients during clinical rotations, the one who translated medical language into plain words, the one who remembered not just the diagnosis, but the person attached to it. There was a moment during his second year that changed something in him permanently. He was doing a rotation in a hospital in a low-income urban neighborhood. Long shifts, exhausting work. One evening near the end of a long shift, he was assigned to check in on an elderly man in one of the wards. The man's name was Mr. Thomas. He was 80 years old, recently widowed, and had been admitted for complications from diabetes. He spoke very little English. He had no family present. He was frightened and confused, and the nursing staff, stretched thin from a double shift, hadn't had time to sit with him. Daniel sat beside him for 20 minutes. He didn't speak the man's language, but he was calm. He showed him simple things, pointed to the window, to the door, to the water glass. He smiled. He kept his voice soft and steady. He held the man's hand for a moment when he saw how much he was trembling. And slowly, Mr. Thomas calmed down. His breathing steadied. The fear in his eyes eased just slightly. As Daniel got up to leave, the old man said something in his language. One of the nurses nearby translated quietly. He had said, "Thank you for sitting with me. I thought I was going to be alone." Daniel walked out of that ward and stood in the hallway for a long moment. And in that hallway, exhausted and in his second year of medical school, something became completely and finally clear to him. He understood why the first 4 schools had said no. He understood why the second wave of 5 had also said no. He understood why God had allowed him to spend those years in the small clinic, learning the names of frightened patients, sitting beside confused elderly women at bus stops, learning how to make the scared feel less scared. If any of those original doors had opened, he would have gone to a prestigious school and followed a prestigious path and likely ended up in a prestigious practice somewhere that never touched the lives of Mr. Thomas or Mrs. Avery or the young mothers in the waiting room. He would have been a good doctor, probably, but not this kind of doctor. Not the kind who understood from the inside what it felt like to be the frightened person on the other side of the desk. Not the kind who had learned through years of quiet service that sometimes the most powerful medicine is just someone sitting beside you and saying with their presence, "I see you. You are not alone." The doors hadn't closed because he wasn't good enough. They had closed because where he was headed wasn't where he was needed. He finished medical school. He completed his residency in family medicine at a community health center. He turned down 2 offers from larger, more comfortable private practices. He went back eventually to a community much like the one he had grown up in, a community of working people and elderly residents and young families without much margin. He opened a small practice there, small and honest and deeply rooted in the neighborhood it served. On his first day, he drove past his old church on the way to the office, the 3rd pew from the front where his family had always sat, the small building with the simple steeple. He thought about the boy he had been, the boy who had dreamed of becoming a doctor to carry good news to frightened families. He thought about the years of rejection, the letters, the silence, the nights of prayer in the dark with no answer he could feel. And he understood now fully and deeply that he had been answered. Not on his timeline, not in the way he had planned, but he had been answered. Every closed door had been a hand gently steering him down a road that looked wrong from the outside, but led exactly where he was needed. He had been protected from a version of his life that would have looked successful on paper, but missed the thing that made his life actually meaningful. His first patient that morning was an elderly woman, 73 years old, silver hair, sharp eyes. She had moved into the neighborhood recently to be closer to her granddaughter. She came in alone. Her name was not Mrs. Avery, but when she sat across from him and said, "It's nice to have a doctor who looks like he'll actually listen," Daniel smiled in a way that came from somewhere very deep. He pulled his chair a little closer and said, "I'm listening. Tell me everything." He thought of Mrs. Avery sometimes. He had lost track of her after leaving the clinic. He didn't know what had happened to her, but he thought of her thin hands and sharp eyes, and the way she had said, "You were made for something." He thought of how she had said it, not as a compliment, but as a recognition, as if she had seen something in him that he hadn't yet found in himself. In a way, she had. She had seen the doctor before the degree, before the residency, before the office with his name on the door. She had seen it in the way he carried water without being asked, in the way he sat down beside people instead of rushing past them. She had seen that the gift was never really in the title. It had always been in the presence, in the willingness to stay. There is something important here, something worth sitting with. Because if you have been carrying the pain of a closed door for a long time, if you have prayed faithfully and worked honestly and still watched opportunity after opportunity slip away, then you deserve to hear this clearly. Not as empty comfort, not as a nice thing to say, but as something that is true. God sees what you cannot see yet. He sees the full road. You see the door in front of you. He sees where that door leads. He sees every turn after it. He sees the person you will become if you walk through it and the person you will become if you don't. And sometimes, in love and wisdom that goes so far beyond what we can understand, He closes the door not because you are unworthy of what is on the other side, but because what is on the other side is not worthy of you. Not worthy of the full life He is preparing for you. Not worthy of the person He is shaping you to become. Sometimes rejection is the most profound form of protection. Daniel never stopped being grateful for those rejections, not in a performative way, not as something he said in testimony to sound spiritual, but in a real, daily, lived way. Every time he sat beside a frightened patient and watched the fear leave their face, he felt it. Every time a parent came in with a sick child and he was able to speak calmly and clearly and bring the temperature of the room down from panic to peace, he felt it. Every time someone said, "I've never had a doctor who made me feel like I mattered," he felt it. Those moments were the fruit of years of closed doors, years of confusion, years of praying in the dark and hearing nothing back. Every rejection letter, every silent season, every night of wondering if God had forgotten him. All of it had been preparation, all of it had been building something. Not in the loud, obvious way of open doors and clear paths, but in the quiet, invisible, patient way that real foundations are always built. He spoke about this once at a small gathering at his church. Not a formal sermon, just a conversation. He sat in a chair at the front, and a few dozen people sat in the pews, and he just talked. He told them his story, the dream, the rejections, the years at the clinic, Mrs. Avery at the bus stop, Mr. Thomas in the hospital ward, the hallway where everything became clear. And when he finished, a young woman in the back raised her hand. She looked like she hadn't slept well in a long time. She was carrying something very heavy and had been carrying it alone. She said, "How do you keep trusting when you can't see anything? How do you keep believing when every door closes?" Daniel thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "You trust not because you can see the destination. You trust because you know the character of the one who is holding your hand in the dark. You have watched him be faithful before, in small things, in ways you maybe didn't even notice, and you hold on to that. You hold on to the evidence of what he has already done, and you let it be enough for the moment you are in." He paused. Then he added, "And you keep serving. You keep showing up for people around you, not because it will hurry the answer, but because when you are faithful in small things, something happens inside you. Something gets built, something gets deepened, and when the answer finally comes, and it will come, you will have become the person who is ready to receive it." The young woman in the back nodded slowly, and something in her face changed just slightly. Not a dramatic change, not a sudden peace, just a small softening, just a little bit of the weight shifting. And Daniel recognized that look because he had worn it himself once. It was the look of someone who was still in the dark, but had just heard a sound that made them believe a door was not as far away as they feared. He thought about his journey on the drive home that night. The long, winding road of it. The years that had felt wasted, but weren't. The seasons that had felt empty, but were full of things he hadn't had eyes to see yet. He thought about how different people experience the silence of God so differently. Some people grow bitter in it, some people grow harder. Some people walk away from faith altogether because the closed doors feel like abandonment and they cannot find a reason to keep knocking. He understood that. He had touched the edge of it himself during those long nights of waiting. He had felt the pull of giving up, not on God exactly, but on the dream, on the belief that the dream and faith could coexist. He had come close to accepting a smaller version of his own life, a version that fit inside the space that had been given to him instead of reaching for the one he had been placed on earth to inhabit. And what had kept him? He thought about that honestly. It wasn't great faith. It wasn't some special spiritual gift. It was smaller than that. It was the habit of prayer, even when prayer felt like talking to a ceiling. It was the habit of service, of showing up and helping and being present for people, even when no one was doing any of that for him. It was Mrs. Avery saying, "You were made for something," at a moment when he had almost stopped believing that was true. It was his mother's hands on his shoulders. It was the third pew from the front and the old hymns he knew by heart. It was small things, human things, the ordinary grace of ordinary faithfulness. That is what sustained him. Not answers, not clear signs, not a voice from heaven, just the small daily decision to keep going, keep praying, keep serving, keep trusting that the one who had planted the dream in his heart in the first place had not abandoned either the dream or the dreamer. And now, years later, sitting in a car driving home through quiet streets after speaking honestly to a room of people who needed to hear that their suffering had meaning, he felt a fullness that no open door could have given him. Because this fullness had been earned, not by achievement, but by endurance, by the kind of faithfulness that doesn't make headlines, the quiet faithfulness of someone who keeps going even when they cannot see why. He thought about you, not you specifically, but people like you, people sitting in the middle of their own closed-door season right now, people who have done everything right and still watch things fall apart, people who are carrying prayers that feel like they are bouncing off the walls and coming back unanswered, people who are tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, tired in the soul, tired of hoping and being disappointed, tired of watching other people's doors open while theirs stays closed. He wanted them to know. He wanted to reach through the distance and the silence and just say, the closed door is not the end. It is not abandonment. It is not punishment. It is not evidence that you are forgotten or unworthy or not enough. It may be the most loving thing happening in your life right now, even though it does not feel that way, even though it feels like loss, even though it is painful and confusing and lonely, because God is not careless with your life. He is not random with your suffering. He does not allow seasons of closed doors and silence and waiting without purpose. Every single thing He permits has a use. Every closed door is either protecting you from something you cannot see or preparing you for something you are not yet ready to carry. And sometimes, most often in fact, it is both at the same time. You are not behind. You are not a failure. You are not forgotten. You are being shaped. And shaping takes time. It takes pressure. It takes the kind of patience that feels less like peace and more like endurance. But on the other side of it, if you hold on, there is a life waiting for you that you could never have stumbled into through the door you were originally knocking on. A life that fits you more deeply. A life that uses not just your skills, but your story. Not just your education, but your experience. Not just your strengths, but your wounds. Your wounds are not wasted. Daniel's years of rejection were not wasted. Every moment of confusion and questioning and sitting in the dark, talking to what felt like an empty heaven, none of it was wasted. It was all being woven into something that would one day be handed back to you as a gift to give to the world. The night Daniel got home, he sat for a while at his kitchen table with a cup of tea and the quiet of the house around him. His own family was asleep. He could hear the soft breathing of the house. He sat there and let himself feel the fullness of the life he had. Not a perfect life, not an easy one. He still carried things. Exhaustion. The weight of other people's suffering that you absorb over years of working that close to it. The occasional doubt. The ordinary human ache of wanting things to be easier than they are. But he also carried this. The deep, unshakable knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Doing exactly what he was made to do, reaching the people he was made to reach, and that none of it, not one single year of it, would have been possible if any of those original doors had opened the way he wanted them to. That is the mystery of God's protection. It does not always look like protection in the moment. It looks like loss. It looks like failure. It looks like rejection. It looks like silence. It looks like the dream slipping through your fingers, no matter how tightly you hold on. But underneath all of that, invisible and patient, there is a hand that knows the full road, a hand that is steering you not away from your destiny, but toward the truest version of it, a version you could not have imagined or designed for yourself, a version that requires not just your gifts, but everything you have been through. So, if you are in the middle of that season right now, if every door is closed, and the silence feels crushing, and you are running out of the energy to keep believing, if you have prayed the same prayer for so long that the words feel hollow, if you are starting to wonder if God has moved on, if you are carrying a grief that comes from wanting something good and being told no over and over again, hold on. Not because the door will open tomorrow, not because the answer is coming on your timeline, but because the one who is holding you in this season is the same one who has always been faithful, the same one who made you, who knows every detail of you, who planted the dream in your chest in the first place, who has watched every closed door and every silent night, and has not looked away from you for a single moment. He has not forgotten you. He is not finished with you. The closed doors are not the end of your story. They may in fact be the very thing that makes your story worth telling someday. You were made for something, not in spite of what you've been through. Because of it. The doors that closed were not punishments. They were not evidence that you were not enough. They were God's quiet, faithful, sometimes painful act of love. An act that said, not this way, not because you don't deserve it, but because I have something better prepared for you down a road you haven't walked yet. A road that needs exactly who you are. Every part of you. The healed parts and the still healing parts. The confident parts and the parts that learned humility through being brought low. All of it. Every part of your story is being used. Every season of waiting, every night of unanswered prayer, every closed door, every rejection, every silence. All of it is in His hands. All of it has purpose. All of it is leading somewhere. And when you will arrive, you will look back at the road behind you and you will understand. Just like Daniel in that hallway outside Mr. Thomas's room. Just like Daniel driving past his childhood church on the first morning of the life he was always meant to have. You will look back and you will see it clearly. Every turn, every detour, every closed door that felt like a dead end, but was actually a redirection. And you will feel not bitterness, but gratitude. Not regret, but wonder. Not loss, but fullness. Because the God who closes doors does not do it to destroy your future. He closes them to protect it. He closes them because He loves you too much to let you settle for something that wasn't made for you. He closes them because He is already building something on the other side that needs you to have walked exactly this road to be ready for it. And the silence you are hearing right now, that silence is not absence. It is not abandonment. It is not God looking away. It is the sound of something being prepared. It is the sound of the right door being built for you. Hold on, stay faithful, keep serving, keep praying, keep being kind even when kindness costs you something. Keep showing up for the people around you even when no one is showing up for you. Keep planting seeds in ground that looks dry because you do not always get to see the season of the harvest from the season of the planting. And trust not because you can see the plan. Trust because you know the planner. Trust because He has never once in all of history been wrong. Trust because every person who has ever sat in the dark season of closed doors and kept their faith and kept their kindness and kept walking has eventually looked back and said, He was faithful. Especially then, you are not forgotten. You are not failing. You are not lost. You are exactly where a faithful God is doing His most careful and most loving work in your life. And that is not the end of your story. That is the beginning of the best part of it. Sometimes the doors that refuse to open are the truest proof that God is paying the closest attention. And sometimes the longest silence is just God making sure that when the door finally opens, you will be fully ready for everything beautiful waiting on the other side.